Analysis, conversations, and the ripple effect of the first slew of executive orders signed by the new US President, President Donald Trump, is still being felt and being discussed. But what happens to those executive orders or policies that could impact Indians, Indians particularly living in the United States of America? To discuss this and more, I'm being joined by Milan Vaishnav, Senior Fellow, Carnegie Endowment. Milan, thank you so much for joining us. I've been watching and reading things that you've said and you've been writing about. It is indeed a very important piece of executive order, not in terms of the good of it, but in terms of how it has really stirred an entire peoples in the United States of America. But it also has come with some news of a federal judge having blocked the order. So, can you just break it down for us and explain what really has happened?
Sure. There were a flurry of executive orders that President Trump issued within really the opening minutes of his second term. One of the most noteworthy, and in fact, the most controversial, was an executive order essentially prohibiting or curbing what's been known as birthright citizenship, which quite simply is that if you are a parent residing in the United States, and you have a child on US soil, that child is a US citizen. And this is true even if you are not a permanent resident or a citizen. You could be a student, you could be here on a tourist visa, you could be here on an H-1B, skilled worker visa. There are very small exceptions. For instance, if you're a diplomat, an Indian diplomat, your child would be Indian, not necessarily an American. And this has really been a kind of bedrock of US constitutional thinking. It's embedded within something known as the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. And Trump had mused on the campaign trail of eliminating this as a way of, curbing immigration. He feels like many people try to game the system. They plan trips to the United States, they get regular visas here, and then have children so that they can become US citizens. It was immediately challenged by a number of organizations, a number of states, attorney generals, and so on and so forth. A federal judge just yesterday, who was an appointee of another Republican president, Ronald Reagan, stayed that executive order for 2 weeks. If you read the comments the judge made, I mean, they were absolutely blistering, going so far as to um, tell ask, I should say, the member of the administration's Justice Department who was arguing the case in court, whether he thought this was constitutional at all. And when he said yes, he said, basically, you shouldn't have right to practice at the bar if you think this is constitutional. It's blatantly unconstitutional,
Unconstitutional.
mind-boggling that you would even do this.
Right. We will come to the birthright citizenship, and it is very important. But before that, if I could just touch upon the deportation and immigration issue as well, and then we will have a longer conversation on the earlier aspect. Immigration, deportations of illegals is a concern for India. While India has said that they don't have a problem discussing and cooperating on illegal immigration issue, the fact is that we are talking about 725,000 as per reports, of which more than 20,000 are in detention centers. How do you think this will work out? Will it be challenged? Are there lacunae in the entire order that the migrants are looking at?
Well, I mean, there'll be all sorts of legal challenges. You can bet on that for a variety of different standpoints. Some people will question the ability to do this through executive action as opposed to passing legislation through both houses of Congress.
Hmm.
I should mention that these are executive orders, right? So they don't have the full weight of Congress. And so that can create a constitutional issue. There are, of course, people who are coming here who may be undocumented. Who are refugees or people who are seeking asylum status. We should just note for your viewers that, many Indians who do come here without proper documentation do end up applying to stay. indefinitely via the system of a regime of political asylum that we have. I think what's noteworthy is that the government of India has clearly anticipated some of Trump's moves. And a little notice news item before the elections, back when President Biden was still president, there were several chartered Air India flights, which had repatriated hundreds of Indian irregular migrants from the United States back to India. Now we understand through media reports that there are conversations underway between the two governments to repatriate as many as 18,000 so-called illegal immigrants to the United States. So this is something where I think the government of India has calculated that we better be proactive on the front foot, in part because this problem is not going to go away. And secondly, we want to get on Trump's good side.
So you think that there is going to be cooperation, despite the fact that Milan, somebody who actually not just looks at India, US, but also particularly India, that there could be a political cost to having Indians return to India from the United States of America. Everybody knows the kind of money they pay, the land they sell, the homes they sell just to get there. And for them to return, we're talking about families and people being absolutely disgruntled by this administration. And I mean the Modi administration.
Well, look, I mean, we have to return here to the law of big numbers, right? Which sounds very crass. We're talking about a country with 1.4 billion people. And so the political blowback from repatriating, thousands upon thousands is I don't think something that the Modi government is necessarily altogether obsessed with. I think the larger question is, um, you know, what in the long term are the steps that India and the United States and others, namely Canada, some of the Central American countries, going to take to try and stem this tide? One thing which really surprised me when I looked at the data and talked to the experts is that we have this mental image, at least many of us do, of many illegal Indian migrants coming through the southern border, starting in Central America, winding their way up in Mexico, crossing into places like Texas, Arizona, California. But in fact, there's been a really dramatic shift in recent years where much of the illegal border crossing on the account of Indians is actually happening via the northern border. In fact, the number one sector of the United States where the maximum number of Indians are being apprehended is what's known as the Swanton sector, which covers places like Vermont, upstate New York, New Hampshire. So this is an arrangement that is going to require cooperation not just between the US and India, but also through third countries like Canada, which makes things very interesting given the nature of Indo-Canadian relations of late.
All right. So we are looking at deportations, and while the numbers are small, they're concentrated in only a couple of states, particularly Punjab, Gujarat. So it will have an impact because families, we're talking about larger number and communities, little blocks, all of them get involved when people are returned because then dreams are shattered. Having said that, how do you see what's your reading on how the Trump administration is going to engage India? We saw that the first bilateral was with the Indian Foreign Minister, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar, but it was not just to talk about like has been in the past, where the joint statements read very differently. They talk about how there's strategic partnership, they want enhancement of ties. Over here, Marco Rubio was very clear that he needed to raise concerns regarding the immigration problem, and he did that.
Yeah, look, I think if you want to reflect on the first 4 days or 5 days of this administration, I think it's pretty safe to conclude that thus far, it's still early days, but India has played its hand very well, would be my assessment. I mean, just, think about the facts. You have Minister Jaishankar seated in the second or third row at a rather intimate inauguration because it was moved indoors to the Capitol Rotunda because of the cold weather in Washington. That was followed the very next day by this meeting of the Quad foreign ministers, which of course include Minister Jaishankar, Marco Rubio's very first meeting, then his very first bilateral meeting with Mr. Jaishankar. You had these behind the scenes talks about repatriation of illegal migrants in the United States of Indian origin. And you also have rumors that are doing the rounds, including there was a very interesting Bloomberg report about the outlines of some potential trade concessions that India might be willing to make again to try and demonstrate its willingness to cooperate with President Trump. So I think over the past few months, since November 5th until January 20th, the government of India has done a lot of hard thinking about how it might want to position itself. And I think it's realized that giving the president a few early wins to put on the board is going to serve it in very good standing for the medium to long term. And I think that's the case they're prosecuting right now.
Right. Now, shifting focus back to birthright citizenship has been stopped by a federal judge, but this is the first and maybe one of the biggest challenges for Donald Trump in terms of getting this through. Do you think it'll be very difficult, or will he be able to manage revoking this right?
Well, you would expect there might be a simple answer. There's not really. I mean, what I expect to happen is that, this will wind its way up now to the Supreme Court, presumably. I suspect there will be an appeal by the Trump administration to this lower court judge. It will go to the Supreme Court, presumably. And, in a normal world, one would think they would strike this down. I mean, the language of the 14th Amendment is pretty clear. However, we have a kind of unprecedented situation, at least in modern times, where we have a very conservative, right-leaning court, which has shown fantastic deference to the executive on any number of things, including questions of presidential immunity, corruption, things that we had long been kind of settled law. And so what the court might do, one really can't speculate. But I think, if you step back and you talk to legal scholars who really have spent their lives studying the Constitution, they say, first of all, this is patently on its face unconstitutional. But second of all, if you want to have a real debate about who belongs and who doesn't, then you can amend the 14th Constitution. I mean, there's a procedure for that. Obviously, it's a very high bar. But doing this through executive order is a non-starter. Now, it all comes down to one clause, in fact, in the 14th Amendment, which refers to people who are under the jurisdiction of the United States. And what the Trump administration lawyers are saying is that illegal immigrants are not under the jurisdiction of the United States because they are coming here undocumented, and therefore they don't deserve citizenship, right? So that is where the rubber is going to meet the road.
Okay, very interesting that you talk about this clause. Now, let's just talk about the issue at hand over here and the controversy and both sides of the story. Over here, many say that most say that America is built or was built and continues to be built by immigrants, and that they are an integral part of America, American society, American identity. But times have changed, and many others do say that there is an American identity that exists and it does not belong to those who have come from afar. And in many other countries, if a foreigner is born in that country, including in India, they do not automatically, naturally become the citizen of that country. Why can't that law apply to America as well, Milan?
I mean, look, this is a debate or a discussion about the very DNA of the United States, right? And I'm sorry to be blunt, but unless you were a Native American, you came from somebody else, somewhere
Yes.
else, right? I mean, back in the 17, 1800s, we saw Ireland and Italy and Poland as far-flung places in the way that we now characterize places like China and the Philippines and India, right? And so this is not a new issue. But take your philosophical lens and just think about practical matters, right? I mean, this is a country that is getting older. We see the data on the labor market statistics, the stresses that are likely to come on big public programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. They require having a robust and healthy workforce. And so, frankly, we need immigration. Right now, we are not in a dire situation, say like Japan or some countries in Europe, which are far aging far faster than we are. But that's a reality. The second is, think about the priorities of the past administration and the new administration as regards to, cutting edge technology, AI, being a leader in quantum, right? In these highly skill intensive STEM fields. The fact of the matter is, the United States does not have the talent pool it requires at this present moment to be leaders in those fields. And you don't have to take my word for it. Go talk to Micron, talk to NVIDIA, talk to Intel, talk to Apple, Google. These are the people who are making the loudest noises about needing to not only retain high skilled immigration, but in fact increase. And the one country in which they focus on the most is India, given the nature of its talent pool and the sorts of people who are being trained at the country's finest institutions, right? So again, philosophy is fine and good, but let's just think about brass tacks, bread and butter issues like the economy, jobs, where the country is headed in terms of, stealing a march on other countries, not least China, when it comes to, cutting edge technology issues. All of those things require robust immigration.
Right, but we have to make the distinction between immigration and citizenship, right? Over here, my question to you, Milan, would be then that you're saying that the talent does not exist in the United States of America internally, and therefore you need talent from India and many such other countries, move bright minds into America. But the fact is that they're still not citizens over there, and their children who are born there then become citizens, green card holders aside. I'm talking about the H-1B visa holders. What they still exist in America. They end up in America because if you have to work in the sectors that you are working, tech, space, science and technology, then people from India also leave because they are looking at places where they can actually deliver. So they actually end up in America. Why should then America give them citizenship?
Oh, look, I mean, it's all part of the same argument, right? I mean, want to train this talent, you want to nurture this talent, you want to attract this talent. A large segment of this talent wants to make America its home, right? And so if you close off pathways for putting down roots, for building a family, for basically planning your future lives here, right? That's going to have an effect on the supply of high skilled labor you have, right? And there'll be other countries, whether it's Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, who will take advantage of that, right? So this is a this is a battle for global talent,
So you are
and there are certain
saying
things that you need to do.
So you are saying that this revoking of birthright citizenship would lead or disincentivize people from getting to going to America?
I think so, because look, there are already so many obstacles in the way that I think give a lot of people second thought. I mean, talk to Indians who have been in the queue for permanent residency or a green card, right? I mean, it's a really harrowing, tortuous experience. Or people who are on H-1Bs who have trouble getting H-1B extensions or getting work authorization for their spouses, right? Those are already, if you, I mean, look at global rankings of kind of competitiveness, right? I mean, these are things that are already strikes against the United States. If you were then to essentially adjust the policy framework of the country from the highest levels and say, look, I mean, essentially, we want to use you, but you have no home here, right? I mean, I think that's going to be a disincentive in the long term. I absolutely believe that.
So you do think that it'll disincentivize them from going to America? They choose other countries, but America.
Or ironically, they come here for studies. We train them at our best universities, and then we wave them goodbye as they take their talents elsewhere.
That's the point, Milan. Now, green card holders don't fall under the revocation of birthright citizenship order of Donald Trump. Their children will still be citizens, right? If I've not got that
That's
wrong.
right. Yeah, this this
So if
this
they,
broadly would affect people if you're coming from India, say if you're on a tourist, student, or temporary status visa like an H-1B.
the other thing that I remember Donald Trump saying was that keep the talent within America, where in one of his campaign speeches, he had said that those who study in Ivy League colleges in America should automatically be given green card. Why should they be
Yeah.
sent back to their countries? Why should they leave America after having learned, trained, and having become so skilled in America? So, do you not see a plan, a policy that where he's saying that talent pool that we train, we will keep, but those who are coming from outside should go back to their homes. If we want some other talent, we'll get some other talent. I'm talking about this because the world order has changed and it's changing constantly. No longer can you say, okay, it was built by immigrants and therefore the argument should continue to stay.
Well, look, I
Is
mean,
there?
let's be honest,
I'm just asking because
yeah.
these are I'm reading and listening to both sides. I'm just giving you the questions that come from the other side,
Well,
from the
there are
Trump camp.
both sides are present in this administration, right? I mean, I think we sometimes fall into this trap as analysts, as journalists, perhaps even as treating the Trump ecosystem as a monolith, right? And let me make an analogy. When Prime Minister Modi was elected in 2014, there was a discussion about, what was the BJP's relationship going to be with the RSS? And a lot of people said, well, they're one and the same, right? I mean, Modi is of the RSS. I think we've learned in 10 years that was a dramatic oversimplification, right? What Mohan Bhagwat believes, what the head of the VHP believes, what Amit Shah and Narendra Modi believe can be four completely different things. Uh, in the United States, we're in a similar situation. We saw this debate play out in the weeks before Trump's inauguration. You had a very clearly defined split between the technologists on the one side, people like Elon Musk and others who are advocating for more immigration, particularly of the high skilled variety, and people who are closer to the MAGA base or the kind of Steve Bannon ultra nationalist wing, people like Stephen Miller, who is now one of the most powerful people in this administration, who believe in essentially curbing not just legal immigration, but also illegal immigration, right? And so this is a debate that's playing out. These same questions are being playing out. But I think you have to choose what you want to optimize for, right? If you are on what I would think is a relatively short-sighted, misbegotten quest to reclaim some golden era of America, then of course you want to shut off of many pathways. But if you're really looking towards the 21st century and you believe all this rhetoric about making America great again, taking the fight to China, building the most powerful economy in the world, and that takes you down a different path that the administration is going to have to choose. Right now, I agree, there's a bit of a muddle because you have both factions present who are making completely different arguments, and ultimately, it's going to the president who's going to decide, and he's spoken on both sides of his mouth. He said, yes, you should stamp a green card immediately once they graduate. But he's also talked about sending people, back home, right? So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, I think, which has to do with the fact that, this is a relatively big tent, and this is, also a testament to the way in which the Republican Party has evolved over the past 10 years.
Right. The problem with, or the issue with right wing parties, Milan, I suppose, is also this, that they always are constantly navigating between what they think should be policy decisions and what the ideological base of their party really is, till the time they're not completely in control of the party, to the extent that ideology wouldn't matter should they want to take a political risk. In this case, we've seen, you spoke about Elon Musk, including Vivek Ramaswamy, but Vivek Ramaswamy having that spat with Laura Loomer and now not in government. What do you make of this? Because we are seeing Donald Trump trying to navigate that space, but I think he's falling into the ideology bit more than making those decisions that could be politically risky for him. Because this
Yeah,
is
I
not a
mean, look,
political risk. This
yeah,
is completely down MAGA line.
yeah. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that Donald Trump has always, the environment in which he thrives is a bit of this kind of, chaos, right? And we saw this in Trump 1.0, where he sort of liked these internal spats and divisions and fights. It was entertaining, it threw up debates and ideas. And so I think, part of what Susie Wiles, as new chief of staff, her challenge is going to be is trying to, take this chaos and find some order and structure within it. Um, but Vivek Ramaswamy, is perhaps an early victim in the sense that he spoke out very loudly about what he saw were the shortcomings in American culture and what immigrants coming to this country, like his own family, have learned and contributed, right? And he was making a very strong cultural argument, and I think that was maybe not the original sin. I think there could have been other disputes about the vision of this idea of this Department of Government Efficiency. There's a lot of big egos, a lot of big personalities involved. I think that allowed for a pretext to essentially, kind of marginalize him. And, let's not forget that he's a very politically ambitious person. He's announced already that he intends to run for governor of Ohio. It's very difficult to run against Washington when you are essentially a Washington bureaucrat, which is what he would have become had he stayed in this job, right? So these are layers upon layers of complexity that you get really in any government, frankly. But I think it's like to the power of 10 when it's in a Trump administration.
Are you expecting a lot of chaos? And before you answer that, there's another really important aspect and reports that we've been reporting on news that's coming from America. That a lot of pregnant women are now rushing to get their C-section surgeries done so that their children are born before the 20th of February. It's in a way sad, but it's also something that screams of what could become, or the kind of chaos that these decisions could really lead to.
Yeah, I mean, look, remember back at the start of the first Trump administration when Trump issued this controversial executive order that came to be known as the Muslim ban, right? Where he essentially prohibited entry from people coming to the United States who hailed from a variety of
Six
Islamic
states,
dominant
yes.
countries. Right, exactly. And I mean, it was absolute chaos at American airports, right? You had lawyers showing up on the spot trying to fight for individuals' rights to come in. The executive order was not carefully worded. Eventually, the court struck it down. It was repromulgated in a different fashion. So, I think two things can be true at the same time, Geeta. I think the first is there's going to be a lot of chaos because that is just how this president operates. And he wants to prove a point, right? Even if birthright citizenship, this executive order, gets put into the deep freeze, right? He wants to send a signal to his base, to other countries, to the broader American public about what kind of America he wants to create. Um, at the same time, I think there's going to be a greater sense of purpose this time. Remember in 2017, he was an accidental president, right? Even Trump himself was not necessarily expecting to win.
Yes.
This organization, and by which I mean the kind of Trump ecosystem, it's not quite an organization, but this ecosystem has had 4 years now in which they have gone about planning their moves. Most importantly, creating lists of personnel who could serve in a Trump 2.0 with one criteria, which is loyalty to the president, right? And I think we're seeing a lot of that in these early appointments, and you'll see that also in people who are really filling rank and file positions in the government that whose names you and I don't even know, right? But who have incredibly influential behind the scenes jobs.
Right. Final word, Milan, before I let you go, in terms of the executive orders, the challenging of the orders in courts. Are we to expect Donald Trump to continue with these policies determined, but with tweaking of maybe some of the areas in the order, the clauses in the order, or will this be completely shelved?
No, I think, look, he is going to push the envelope. But remember, there are many ways in which you can achieve the same outcome, right? There are multiple pathways. There's executive orders, there's legislation, and frankly, there's just the way you manage your administration, right? I mean, there's nothing that says that every year the United States has to fulfill the quota of green cards available that year. You can slow down processing times. You can slow down reduce interview slots. You can do all manner of things. And in fact, many of these things were done in the Trump first term to try and bring the gears of the immigration system to a halt, right? I mean, we've already seen, taking down of apps that allow people to, apply for interviews who are, say, seeking asylum or refugee status, right? People who had visa appointments or citizenship appointments, on the afternoon of January 20th, after Trump was inaugurated, saw those things canceled. So there are a number of things you can do. And I think Trump often takes a kind of, what we call, throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, right? And so that is like a, everything but the kitchen sink kind of mentality. And I think that's what we're likely to see because in addition to actually achieving tangible policy outcomes, right? This is a president who believes in theater, right? This is a
Hmm.
president who was a reality television star, right? I mean, he is operating also in a complete on a completely different plane to try and connect with the American voters, or as he might regard them, American viewers.
Right. Milan Vaishnav, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Network. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.